Dr. Burakowski, let's talk about climate change and winter sports. I mean, there's the obvious here. We think of warmer weather, we think of less snow. Of course, winter weather being less snowy is going to impact winter sports, but there's probably a lot more to this that I want to kind of get into. So can you kind of give me the basics on what you've been researching?
Yeah, so my research focuses primarily on how winters changed in the past and what we can expect for the future. My primary focus area is in the Northeast United States, but I've also done reports more broadly across the United States as well. And what we know about winter warming is that winter is our fastest warming season at over 75%, or nearly 75% of climate stations that have been monitoring weather over long term since the 1970s. And that's concerning. New England, in particular, and the upper Midwest, are winter warming hotspots. We are warming at a much faster rate than the rest of the country. And I'll be clear, nowhere in the United States is winter getting any colder. It is warming universally across the board. And the impacts on winter sports tend to be that, if you're a ski resort, you're going to have fewer days that you're attracting skiers to the slopes. You might also have fewer days of opportunity to make snow using machine-made snow. And that machine-made snow is also going to be subject to melt. It also might be subject to conditions where it's simply not going to be safe to ski. So this requires some maneuvering around these obstacles that Mother Nature will throw in your way. We saw this in December of 2023 in New England. We had a massive rainstorm, unseasonably warm temperatures, and frozen ground that led to a lot of infrastructure damage because of a flood event, and that impacted our ski resorts in the region as well. So it's one thing to have, not great marginal ski conditions, but it's a whole other thing when you can't even open the resort because the parking lot's completely washed out.
Okay, so I mean, the obvious is skiing, and you talked about that in ski slips and snowboarding. Are there any other winter sports that are impacted as well?
Yeah, I recently participated in a study that we looked at the impacts on the ice climbing community in Mount Washington Valley in New Hampshire. And it's a relatively niche sport compared to skiing. Skiing's much more widespread.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, so ice climbing. I mean, you're using ice axes and you are climbing up faces of ice. I have to use my hands there. And it's also, it's an important part of the Mount Washington Valley here in New Hampshire because that's essentially the birthplace of modern day ice climbing. A lot of the equipment that modern day ice climbers used was, developed in New Hampshire. And what we noticed is that this ice climbers, the guides, people who are bringing clients out and teaching them how to ice climb, they've noticed the changes. And when we look at temperature records for the region, they're consistent. So their lived experience is very consistent with what we expect to see. And a lot of that leads to unsafe climbing conditions. I mean, ice climbing inherently is not exactly the safest sport. It's a high risk sport. And I think there's, a certain demographic of people that are really attracted to it, but it's also at risk of falling away. Part of our study was also to look at what the future of ice climbing is in Mount Washington Valley. And what we found was that historically we could support about 100 days per winter season for ice climbing. And in the future, if we didn't do anything about the emissions of trapping greenhouse gases from burning of fossil fuels, that season could be less than a month. And that's a very big decline. If we do act on climate and we do work to reduce emissions, based on policies that were in place, say in like 2021, that was the scenario we used, we would still see a decline. I mean, the season would still shorten to about 65 days, so just over 2 months. And that's still down from 100 days. So the key here is that we need to keep ratcheting up the climate action if we want to preserve sports like that. We also see impacts on ice fishing. So in New Hampshire, ice fishing derbies, very reliant on natural and safe ice cover. And in recent years, we've had to switch one of our largest ice fishing derbies from Lake Winnipesaukee to a much smaller lake nearby, where ice is safer, ice is much more likely to form in thick masses. And this is not just in New Hampshire. In the Midwest, we've seen decreases in ice cover in the Great Lakes on the order of about 22% over the last 50 years. And so it's unsafe conditions, it's thinner ice, and it's also just a shortening of the season overall.
Yeah, so obviously money lost for the tourism business. And then there's like the tourism side of things, and then there's like the competitive sports side of things. So how is that side impacted?
Yeah, so I've been working with an organization that was founded by a professional snowboarder. Protect Our Winters was founded by Jeremy Jones back in 2007. And as a professional snowboarder, he had noticed the changes in the places where he was training, in places that he enjoyed snowboarding, and asking amongst his community, the Olympians are noticing it too. And I think that's important. I mean, this is a competitive sport. It brings in a lot of economic activity for the cities that host the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in particular. And looking forward into the future, again, if we didn't act on climate change and continue to emit greenhouse gases and continue to trap heat in the atmosphere, about half of the venues that have hosted the Olympics in the past would be able to continue to host that in the future. And that's pretty alarming. I mean, we're losing half of the venues that historically have hosted it in the past. And I think it's also, there's a livelihood associated with this as well. Sometimes you can't put an economic value in the type of emotional and mental relief that you get from having a really fun day in the snow. And that loss has a term. There's a term that was coined by Glenn Albrecht in 2007 called solastalgia. And it's rooted in solace, the comfort you get from home, and then also algia, the grief or loss or suffering. And I feel like I experienced that with winter. In New Hampshire, we are seeing excessive snow loss. It becomes less of the white winter snow season and more of the mud brown stick season. And it's just not the same. It's something you can't really even put a dollar value on.
Less snow is kind of the obvious one. Are there other impacts of climate change that are affecting winter sports too that are a little less obvious, like sea level rise or wildfires or extreme weather events?
The extreme weather events piece was something that really came into play in December of 2023, especially in New England. We had a rain on snow on frozen ground event. And it wasn't just a rain. It was like a heavy rain. We were talking 4 to 6 inches in the mountains over a 24-hour period. And it was on a snowpack, a 2-foot deep snowpack. And when you have that much warm rain, especially, I mean, this was an unseasonably warm event coming into the region. It's the impact also on infrastructure. So the washout of roads and parking lots and culverts. And that goes beyond just being able to ski or not. It's also that you can't open the resorts. It also means that people's homes are being washed away and damaged in a way that they can't recover them in the same way.
Do you have any future research plans to look at the opposite side of things, summer sports, summer Olympics, and how that could be impacted?
I personally have not looked at that. Protect Our Winters did a report, I think it was about 2 years ago, looking at the impacts on summer sports. And a large concern is air quality. So in summertime, when we have forest fires, and we saw this in New York City, it was unsafe to go outside because the air was so choked with, very poor quality air from forest fires. And I have friends that lived in California during a really bad forest fire year, and she couldn't let her kids go outside to play. So I think from a summer recreation point of view, air quality is up there, and heat extremes as well. I mean, the possibilities of heat stroke when you have heat waves that are lasting longer, like what we saw in Arizona and Texas, having days on days on days that are greater than 100 degrees. It's just not safe for outdoor recreation.
So looking ahead to Winter Olympics in 2 years, right? Italy? Is this something that in 2 years we're going to feel the impacts of already, or are we talking longer down the road?
Resorts or venues that are at a higher elevation are probably going to be more resilient. They are going to be beholden to variable weather patterns. So, you could look out and you end up with a good year and you end up with some good winter. But overall, the trends are indicating that into the future, many of the places that historically have hosted the Olympics in the past, less than half of them or about half of them are still going to be viable in the future. So that's a severe cutoff right there. And, if that's what's keeping people involved in winter sports and encouraging them to even join the sport, that's problematic. I think there's a loss there. Again, that's both economic and also a loss of cultural traditions as well.
Continuing on the path that we're on, do we reach the point where artificial snow is not even doable?
I mean, the fact of the matter is that artificial snow has its limits. Ideally, most efficient snowmaking is done at a temperature that's less than 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The warmer it gets above 28 degrees Fahrenheit, the less efficient it becomes. And at a certain point, it's not even at a certain point, it's a very specific point. At 32 degrees Fahrenheit, ice is going to melt. And you might have snowmaking machine-made snow that can last a little bit longer. It melts slower, but it is still going to melt at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So if your daytime temperatures are above freezing, that means that even the machine-made snow is going to melt. The other bits I'd like to add are mostly about just climate justice. I mean, when we talk about outdoor recreation, it's usually something that folks are participating in from a place of privilege. And there's a lot of impacts of climate that are really impacting folks in a way that's threatening their homes and their their lives. So when whenever I experience a day where it's not snowy, I'm also thinking about the folks that maybe lost their home in a winter storm, or the folks that can't let their kids go outside because of forest fires, and worse, or just simply bearing the brunt when they haven't even been necessarily part of the problem in terms of emitting greenhouse gases. So I would say it's on us, the United States. We are the largest cumulative emitter of greenhouse gas emissions back in time. And it's our responsibility to act as a nation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. While you're here, check out some other videos you just may like.